Welcome back, everyone. Rarely will Muslim apologists attempt to defend Islam directly on its own merits. It's virtually impossible. More often, Muslim apologists would rather attack another worldview than defend their own. So, at the very least, Muslims will give their construal of another religion and then argue that the same flaws critics point to in Islam are present in their critics' worldview too. So, one's just as bad as the other, which is a stupid argument. But maybe if the Dawah Bros weren't super busy blackmailing their secret wives, they could come up with something better. At most, however, Muslim apologists, when they aren't too busy doxing their opponents, will caricature a competing worldview and then embark on a quest to show that, compared to such and such a worldview, Islam is even better. Now that's a real stretch. A biblical text used frequently by Muslim apologists for such purposes is from Numbers 31. This is Moses speaking. Now therefore kill every male among the little ones and kill every woman who has known a man by lying with him. But all the young girls who have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. In this video, we will discuss the following. First, a brief review of ancient Near Eastern war rhetoric. Second, we will look at the structure of Numbers 31 and relevant contextual factors. That three lead to some interesting conclusions. Let's begin with number one, a brief review of ancient Near Eastern war rhetoric. In the Old Testament, we encounter ancient Near Eastern literature, and present in such literature are unique ways that battles are described. Hyperbole of various sorts is employed, so maybe a lengthy battle only took a day when it actually took 2 weeks. Or maybe an entire city was wiped out, but it actually wasn't. Such language was stock turn of phrase for decisive victory in the ancient Near East. This is well known among scholars, but less clear to non-specialists. For example, total kill language is used in 1 Samuel, only to have the same people groups in the same area a few years later. The same type of thing occurs in a variety of ways in the book of Joshua. In Numbers 31, the Israelites killed every male among the Midianites, except that they didn't, because the Midianites show up later. Again, in Numbers 31, the spoils of war are recounted in extraordinary quantities. Scholars from a variety of backgrounds have looked at those numbers and concluded that, maybe they serve another purpose, and they shouldn't be taken with wooden literalism. There's hyperbole, symbolism, or something else going on. The logic of this sort of communication isn't important to us in this video. Just know that it exists and should be considered when interpreting Numbers 31. Next, we'll look at the structure and context of Numbers 31. Starting at about the second half of the book of Numbers, Moses' patience with the people is wearing thin, and some of his flaws begin to show. In chapter 20, Moses and Aaron seem to put themselves in God's place in the way that they provided water for the people. Their sin is described as harshly as the unbelief of the first generation of Israelites, and consequently they, like those Israelites, will not be allowed in the Promised Land. During a grotesque scene of idolatry in chapter 25, which is the background for our chapter 31, Moses is rather passive and silent. A priest has to take action to stop the judgment on the people. In chapter 27, when Moses is told he's going to die, he asks God to appoint a new leader for the people. This seems like an honorable request, and the Lord grants the request, kind of. Joshua will be the new leader, but this was formalized in a ceremony where Joshua stood before a priest named Eleazar. The language used in that passage is used elsewhere to describe someone who is presenting themselves to a person of higher rank, like a king. Joshua is the new leader, but this doesn't seem precisely what Moses had in mind. So while we can admire Moses and perhaps even be sympathetic as the people drove him to his wits' end, by the time we get to Numbers 31, we have to ask if Moses' order of vengeance is in line with the divine command. This is where we need to look at the structure of Numbers 31. I've adapted this from a 2015 article in the Journal of Biblical Literature by Ken Brown, and I'll continue to draw from that article throughout this video. So notice, first of all, that we have two pairs of command, obedience, and extension. Verses 1 and 2 are the Lord's command to Moses. Verses 3 and 4, Moses commands Israel to exact vengeance. There's a detailed lexical argument that we will not get into that shows that these two commands are not the same thing. There are some important differences. Then we have obedience. There's a brief description of war, and the war happened as the Lord commanded. Then there's the extension. Moses commands the killing of women and boys. Moving towards the second half of the passage, we have a command again, we have obedience, and then we have extension. The officers bring additional contributions to Moses and Eleazar. So again, 2 commands, 2 instances of obedience, and 2 extensions. A very important question that we will want to consider is the nature of these extensions. What are we to make of Moses extending the Lord's command? And what about the additional contributions at the end of the chapter? In his article, Ken Brown describes some issues related to Moses' command to kill the women and male children. He says Moses claims shock that they allowed the women to live when they were the ones who, on Balaam's advice, caused the Israelites to act faithlessly against Yahweh in the matter of Peor, so that the plague came upon the congregation of Yahweh. This maintains the same shift in blame from the daughters of the Moabites to the Midianites, first introduced in chapter 25, 16 through 18, but then goes further, condemning all of the women, where Numbers 25 mentioned only one. Still more curiously, Moses then commands them to kill the male children, who have had no role at all before now, only then adding that they should also kill the non-virgin women. He also notes another interesting detail. Let's go back to the structure. As the Lord commanded Moses comes after the brief description of war, described hyperbolically as every male being killed. This is, quote, as the Lord commanded. Moses' puzzling extension of the command comes after this key phrase. Further, there's no record of Moses' order actually being carried out, and there's nothing later in the passage to indicate divine approval, as the Lord commanded, or something similar. Moses' command in Numbers 31 is unique in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, known as the Pentateuch. That fact alone warrants more scrutiny. But there is a tragic parallel in chapter 21 of the book of Judges, where, as it says, every man did what was right in his own eyes. If that's intended as a parallel to Numbers 31, then it's hardly complimentary. Now, let's look at the rest of the chapter. After Moses' apparently unwarranted extension of the Lord's command, he immediately proceeds to the subject of purification. Moses' role, again, seems marginalized. There's no mention of the vengeance he had just commanded. It's as if the people didn't follow his command at all. And it's Eleazar the priest who provides additional instruction and clarification on the Lord's statutes, which were originally given to Moses. When the Lord commands Moses to take count of the plunder, it is of man and beast. The probability that the repeated usage of the word Adam in Hebrew, translated people or man, could refer, per Moses' command, only to young girls who have not known a man by lying with him, who were not killed, is vanishingly low. Rather, this word in the second half of the chapter refers to the same as it did at the beginning of the chapter, a group of people, male and female. Finally, the phrase in verse 35 gives an additional description of the captives, women who had not known a man by lying with him. This gloss attempts to reconcile the accounting of the captives with Moses' command, because the surrounding verses show no awareness that Moses' command had been followed. Now let's look at the officers of the Israelite army and their offerings. Before Moses gave his extension of the Lord's command, he was angry with the commanders because they let so many live. Later in the chapter, though, it's the commanders who bring offerings that are well in excess of what was required. This is the second extension that we were referring to. As Moses had extended the Lord's command, these officers extended what was required of them for their offerings, and it seems that these two extensions should be compared and contrasted. While Moses' extended command apparently fell on deaf ears, the officers' superabundant offerings were accepted by Moses, and perhaps more significantly, by Eleazar the priest. What's more is that their offering was a memorial for the people of Israel before the Lord in the tent of meeting itself. The officers' extension got divine approval. Moses' extension did not. Moses' anger with the officers in the earlier part of the chapter was therefore unjustified. Back to Brown's article where he comments, Moses' and the officers' actions embody two very different responses to that incident, again referring back to the idolatry in Numbers 25, one linked to the complete destruction of the enemy, the other to the atonement and remembrance of Israel. Where Moses angrily demands vengeance on Midian for its role at Baal Peor, the officers' gift vindicates Israel from Midian by averting the plague and reaffirming their commitment to Yahweh's sanctuary. And we finally reached number 3, conclusions. Let's try to pull all of this together into a coherent conclusion. Because of the appalling apostasy back in Numbers 25, Israel needed to be vindicated. You can read some more background about how all of that works by referring to Exodus 30. We didn't have time to talk much about that in this video. So Israel was commanded by the Lord to fight against Midian. The battle and the plunder are described using typical ancient Near Eastern war hyperbole. Then Moses went beyond the Lord's command and directed vengeance against Midian. The text is initially silent on whether Moses' command was actually followed. After the battle, the discourse turns quickly to purification, where, curiously, Eleazar the priest is the one who clarifies statutes originally given to Moses. Male and female captives are described among the spoils of war, which casts serious doubt on any notion of obedience to Moses' extended command. Next, the officers make an extension of their own by going far beyond the required offerings. These offerings became a memorial that Israel had, at least for now, turned from idolatry. So the chapter begins with the Lord's command for Israel to seek vindication from Midian, and that's what happens in the end with the offerings of atonement. Moses' command to kill every male among the little ones and kill every woman who has known a man by lying with him occurs after the war is over, after it had already happened as the Lord commanded, and is an outlier in the chapter, not to mention the entire Torah. It is, however, to be instructively compared and contrasted to the excess of the officers, which is viewed in a positive light. Because of events in chapters leading up to Numbers 31 that we recounted near the beginning of this video, we cannot simply assume that Moses' command was synonymous with what God commanded. Perhaps his command for extra vengeance on Midian was an attempt to make up for his inaction during the idolatry in chapter 25. It's possible. Regardless, Moses' leadership falters at this stage of his life. So in Numbers 31, Eleazar and the officers assume leadership in important ways and take the correct course of action, while Moses' call for violence is unanswered. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.